Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a topic that's, maybe a little unexpected.
Oh.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at the African history of cannabis.
Oh.
And hey, by the way, if you're new to our YouTube channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives.
Yeah, definitely do that.
So get ready because we're going to go way beyond, just the typical headlines and all that.
Right.
And really uncover a whole tapestry of history and culture and even medicinal knowledge all tied to this plant.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Now, one of the things that really hit me when I was prepping for this deep dive was just how many assumptions people have when you start talking about cannabis research. It seems like everyone has an opinion.
Absolutely, yeah.
But very few people have actually dug into the history, especially when it comes to Africa. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in my own experience, when I tell people that I study cannabis, I get the most interesting reactions. Like some folks think it's this super niche topic, and then others, kind of look at me like I'm part of some secret society. But it's fascinating how these perceptions, they're just so ingrained, Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from just limited exposure to the plant's history and its cultural significance.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like we've been looking at it through a very narrow lens, missing the bigger picture. So to really get a grasp on its journey, we need to rewind the clock way back.
Definitely.
So where did cannabis originate? How did it even make its way to Africa?
So cannabis actually originated millions of years ago in Central Asia.
Wow.
But hold on, we're not talking about smoking or, recreational use in these early days.
Right.
Think more practical applications. So like over 12,000 years ago, people across Eurasia were using cannabis seeds and fiber for all sorts of things. And it wasn't until like around 5,000 years ago that we start to see evidence of it being used as an edible drug in South Asia. And then, interestingly enough, cannabis arrived in East Africa relatively late, just over 1,000 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And this late arrival actually sparks a lot of debate among historians and researchers, highlighting how much we still have to uncover about its journey.
Wow, that's fascinating. Makes you wonder about those specific routes it took, right?
Yeah.
And, what kind of cultural exchanges were happening to help it spread.
Definitely.
And speaking of cultural significance, we can't ignore the medicinal potential of cannabis.
Right.
Which is a topic that's generating so much buzz these days. So I'm curious, what can the African history of cannabis teach us about its medicinal applications?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Historical accounts of African people using cannabis medicinally provide some pretty compelling insights.
Okay.
There are records of it being used as a stimulant, a painkiller, and even a potential treatment for trauma and anxiety.
Wait, hold on. Are we talking about like specific conditions or ailments?
Oh, absolutely. For instance, there's this account from a British physician in the 1840s who documented how Central African people who'd been liberated from slave ships used cannabis to cope with the trauma they'd endured. Just imagine the horrific conditions they faced. And this observation alone suggests that maybe exploring cannabis as a treatment for PTSD and anxiety is worth looking into, and might even push us to rethink our whole approach to mental health.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. Really reminds us that there's valuable medicinal knowledge that can come from the most unexpected places.
Definitely.
And that history can offer us some pretty amazing clues for modern medical research. It also makes me think about Duvall's work, where he mentions a link between demanding labor and cannabis use. Can you elaborate on how this highlights the social implications?
Absolutely. So historical accounts show us that African laborers often used cannabis as both a stimulant and a pain reliever.
Right.
There are all these fascinating observations from European travelers who saw porters using cannabis before they set off on these physically demanding journeys.
Yeah.
Like one Portuguese traveler in Angola noted how porters would specifically use cannabis to help them endure long treks while carrying heavy loads. It really paints a picture of resilience and resourcefulness.
Yeah, definitely. So it wasn't just a recreational choice. It was a way to cope with the demands of their work.
Exactly.
This kind of challenges that stereotypical view of cannabis use, doesn't it?
It really does. And what's fascinating is that the historical context shows us that cannabis use wasn't necessarily a personal failing,
right,
but was actually linked to these social and economic factors.
Yeah.
And that really prompts us to ask, what role did exploitation and inequality play in shaping these patterns of drug use?
Right.
And how can we apply these historical insights to modern discussions about drug policy and social justice?
It's about understanding the nuances, the why behind the what.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked origins, medicinal uses, and social implications. But cannabis didn't stay confined to Africa.
Oh, absolutely not.
It became a global traveler, and that journey had a huge impact on global culture.
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Right. So cannabis essentially embarked on this transatlantic journey with enslaved Africans.
Okay.
And its influence is deeply embedded in language, consumption methods, and cultural practices around the world.
Wow.
This cultural exchange often gets overlooked, but it's really crucial for understanding just how deeply entwined cannabis is with global history.
This raises a big question then. How did the movement of cannabis actually shape global culture? What are some specific examples?
Well, let's start with language. The very word marijuana that we use globally that actually originates from Africa.
Oh, really?
It's derived from the Kimbundu word mariamba, which originated in Central Africa.
Wow.
And it's fascinating how this one word traveled across continents and became such a common part of language.
Yeah.
But beyond language, think about how most people consume cannabis today, smoking, right? This wasn't always the dominant method. It was an African innovation. So prehistoric people in East Africa, they invented smoking pipes.
Oh, wow.
And when cannabis came along, they realized that smoking it was a much more efficient method than edibles.
Interesting.
And those water pipes, like hookahs, bongs, and shishas, those trace their roots back to Africa, too.
Wow, I had no idea. So next time I see someone using a bong,
Right.
I'll know that it has this fascinating history rooted in African ingenuity.
Mm-hmm.
Really makes you appreciate how interconnected our world is.
It really does. It really underscores how much we owe to the knowledge and practices of African people, you know?
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that cultural exchange is a two-way street, and we often overlook those contributions from marginalized communities.
Yeah. Makes you wonder what other hidden gems are out there just waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely.
But we can't talk about the global journey of cannabis without addressing, the elephant in the room,
Right.
the economic implications, especially when we think about modern cannabis legalization.
Right.
This whole rush for green gold seems to be creating this whole new wave of exploitation where you see these foreign businesses reaping the biggest rewards while local African communities get left behind. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, you've hit a really critical point. The legalization of cannabis, while it seems progressive on the surface, has actually created a super complex landscape. And that potential for economic growth is really intertwined with the risk of repeating those historical patterns of exploitation,
Right.
The rush for profits in a lot of cases has overshadowed the need for equitable and sustainable development.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how this is playing out?
Oh, absolutely. So let's take a look at the licensing process for cannabis cultivation in many African countries.
Yeah.
It's often structured in a way that favors foreign investors. In some cases, licenses were only made available after foreign businesses offered to pay these huge fees,
Wow.
making it almost impossible for local farmers to even participate in the legal market.
It's almost like we're witnessing a new form of colonialism, where this valuable resource is being extracted without benefiting the people who have the most traditional knowledge about it.
That's a powerful analogy, and sadly, it's pretty accurate in a lot of instances. And then to make matters worse, a lot of these countries continue to criminalize traditional cannabis use for their own citizens,
Yeah.
even while they're exporting cannabis to the rest of the world. It just goes to show you how those historical power dynamics can persist, even when things appear to be progressing.
So what does all this mean? Are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Or is there a way to make sure that cannabis legalization in Africa actually leads to real empowerment for local communities?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a complex issue, and there are no easy answers.
Right.
But I do think there's hope. We need to shift the focus away from just purely economic gains and look at a more holistic approach, one that prioritizes social justice, environmental sustainability, and community ownership.